The Tim Cook Apple that we see now is doing less and less of trying to force and teach the world, and instead finally starting to listen and learn from the world around them.
Over the years, many YouTubers that talk about Apple have made all sorts of videos speculating on Apple's master plan. We've had videos like FPT's Apple is better off without Steve Jobs, and Greg's Gadgets, it's time for a change. While both of these examples do a very decent job at explaining all the ways that Apple could win, I'm going to take a very different approach today. I, Alpha DeWolf, professional idiot who can barely keep a regular upload schedule, am going to make an attempt at one of these. Like with what I did in my iPad Pro video half a year ago, I'm going to take a look at history, today, and then combine the two to try to make some reasonable speculations. So buckle up, because I don't know how to shut up. Okay, so obviously from making one of these, we've had to have a change of some sort. So where did all of these changes start? I'm going to start all the way back in 2019. Why then, you ask? It's because before that time, everyone has mostly been making videos about how Apple sucks because the iPhone bends and needs dongles and stupid notches. This was also when FPT released their Apple is better off without Steve Jobs video. In this video, John Prosser stated how Apple has finally begun listening to the consumer rather than just trying to tell them what it is they want. With the iPhone 11s that came out that year, they've done a lot of nothing but listening. A matte back finish, another lens, and night mode are a few examples for the Pro iPhones. 2019 was a really good year for iPhone hardware. The iPhones aren't the only example from 2019, however. For a long time, Mac Pro users have felt considerably neglected, and rightfully so. The Mac Pro hasn't been updated for about 6 years at the time, all because of this one quote. We seem to have backed ourselves into a thermal corner. Despite Phil Schiller's most remembered quote,
"Can't innovate anymore, Mike."
in that time of waiting, Mac Pro users were complaining about the horrible upgradability. Finally, in November of 2019, they launched the new Mac Pro that shockingly brought back the upgradability that Mac Pro users missed. Another issue that Pro users despise so much on MacBook Pros had begun being resolved in 2019. For about 4 years, MacBooks have been plagued with the butterfly keyboards. These super low travel switches were so problematic that a ton of users actually continued to hold on to their 2015 MacBook Pros. Finally, also in November, Apple launched the 16-inch MacBook Pro that got rid of those terrible butterfly switches for much more reliable scissor switches. 2019 was the beginning of something new for Apple. I can remember back in 2019, despite how much I hate the 11 Pro's camera bump, I grew more excited for what has been lying ahead in the future of Apple. And let me tell you, I wasn't expecting most of it. 2020 was definitely an odd year for Apple for all sorts of different reasons. The first being the pandemic, which has completely changed the way Apple handles press events altogether. It's sad that they went to all that trouble to build and dedicate a beautiful theater to Steve Jobs, and for 2 years has remained mostly empty. But that was also the year that leaks started to get completely out of control. John Prosser, who was a very reasonable and accurate speculator, has escalated to become an accurate leaker. There was a whole saga with the press about John Prosser and his Apple leaks, especially with the iPhone SE. But I'm not talking about the pandemic or leaks. I want to talk about the iPhone SE. I know people that aren't into paying big money for phones. At the time, I knew people that still bought the iPhone 8, the iPhone 7, heck, even the 6S, brand new, just because it was an iPhone, but with a lower price tag. People have constantly been asking for an updated iPhone SE because they love the concept of a $400 iPhone with the latest chipset. And guess what Apple did? They gave them another SE. 2020 was also the year they finished updating all of the MacBooks to get rid of the horrible butterfly keyboard. That was also the year they gave the iPad Pro mouse support, which I still don't understand why people want it. To go along with it, they made a keyboard accessory with a built-in trackpad. On the software side, they finally allowed users to add widgets to their home screen. They also gave us a new app screen and various other features. This was also the year that the ARM transition was announced. That topic doesn't relate to this video as much though. Okay, so 2019 was interesting. 2020 wasn't that great, but fairly okay, I guess. It's 2021 where things get really interesting. This year has been by far the craziest for Apple. They've essentially pulled off another 2019, but with much more stuff. After nearly an entirety of complaints about having the same boring silver iMac design, Apple finally gave us something that caught us all really off guard. They brought back life into the design with colors, which I have seen in person, and let me tell you, they look pretty good. We've also been asking for a new remote for the Apple TV, and they gave us such a greatly improved remote that I can actually say you would probably want to pay the $60 for it. It's that good. The iPhone's got some very impressive video upgrades that are actually tempting me as I speak. The very neglected iPad mini finally got the redesign it deserved, and the biggest, most notable thing this year, especially for the pros, the new 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros. Users have complained so much about the previous gen that for once, Apple actually listened to them and gave them what they wanted. More I/O selection, no touch bar, and better thermal management. This by far has been the biggest example of Apple listening to consumers. The last one and weirdest one of all is the announcement of their new self-repair program. Apple is notorious for having the worst repair policies in the industry. And now all of a sudden, they changed their hearts about the situation. Kinda weird, right? For 3 years now, Apple has been doing a lot more listening to us than ever. Thicker phones for bigger batteries, removal of features that frustrated users, and so many others. It's safe to say that this is definitely not the same "we know what's best, you don't" mentality that Apple has built their entire reputation off of. But here's a big question. Why? In case you didn't know, the majority of Apple's profits come from iPhone hardware sales. But we all know that in a declining smartphone market, that this business strategy is not the best. Even though iPhone sales are still fantastic, every year there's less of a reason to upgrade every year or two, or 3. Or 7. Apple has the best device support in the entire industry, and that allows users to keep their iPhones for up to 7 years now if they want to. So this is a problem that for the most part is being inflicted on themselves. So how has Apple attempted to handle this problem? Services. Back in March of 2019, Apple dumped a few services on us like Apple Arcade, News Plus, and TV Plus. They joined their already existing services, which were Apple Music and iCloud. But here's the kicker. Services need a platform to write off of, and while you could say that Apple does have a fairly deep foot in the water, they were having a problem with giving good reasons to stay in the water. Apple has had a lot of bad press coverage before then. To name a few examples, Ben Gate with the iPhone 6, no headphone jack with the iPhone 7, boring upgrades for both 7 and 8, the 10 has a hideous, stupid, ugly notch, nothing changed with the 10S, the 10R doesn't even have a 1080p display. Obviously, we've gotten over these things by now, but these were all issues back when these phones were brand new. The basic problem was that with bad press and reviews and seemingly increasing prices, some customers within that time thought that they had enough of this and switched to Android on their next upgrade. So Apple started to do something crazy. They listened. 2018 made it seem like the $1,000 iPhone XS was the new standard iPhone, and the $750 XR was just a budget alternative. 2019 completely fixed this issue with marketing the $700 iPhone 11 as the standard iPhone and the 11 Pros as a luxury version. With this marketing and arrangement of the 8s, 10R, 11, and 11 Pros, it allowed more people like myself to realize that you don't have to spend big bucks to get a new iPhone. 2020's lineup further emphasized this with there literally being an iPhone option at every $100. $400 got you the SE, $500 the XR, $600 the 11, $700 the new 12 mini, $800 the 12, and then we got the two ultimate options. With the marketing and pricing changes combined, it has made buying an iPhone much more sense. And believe it or not, these changes actually worked. The press went along and absolutely agreed with the changes Apple was promoting, and it gave them some increased sales. And because iPhones have usually set the standard for being a great phone, well, great phone plus great press coverage equals great sales. But Apple didn't just care about people buying the new iPhones this time, because if they did, then they still wanted to have kept the 8 and 8 Plus and the XR. This structure may not allow getting the latest and greatest in your pocket like the previous one, but it does make sure whatever your budget is, there is a very good chance that whatever phone you're pulling out of your pocket, it's gonna be an iPhone. Now you might be thinking, how is this related to Apple listening to us? Glad you asked. This is just the first step. Now, let's talk about the next. A lot of Android people have never understood why us iPhone users will continue to buy iPhones, even though their Android has more cooler features. It's primarily because Apple has focused on priorities that we care about in a phone, and maybe not necessarily them. We love how iMessage and FaceTime have become a default because not only are they great to use, but everyone with an iPhone has it, so it becomes practical to use as well. The cameras have always produced more reliable shots than Android because they don't have gimmicky features like 100 times zoom to focus on. But while these could also be things that some Android users would like to have, there have been some things that keep them from buying iPhones aside from just because it's Apple and it's expensive. There's a few things I could mention, but they go a little too niche, so I'm not even gonna bother. Once again, we've complained, and they listened. And now more people have been switching to iPhones than ever. Travis MCP did a test to see if the iPhone 13 was enough to get a long-time Android user to switch to iPhone. And the results you might actually find shocking, but to sum it up, the key reason as to what happened is simply because Apple is paying attention to what their customers are looking for in a smartphone. Back in Steve Jobs' time, Apple was focused primarily on making the best product possible, no matter what the cost. But ever since 2019, that focus has shifted dramatically to making the best product for everyone. Telling people what they didn't know they want can hook on a few buyers, but after they find out what it is that they want, they will then criticize where the product or feature falls short. At that point, it is up to Apple to listen and address these shortcomings or to completely ignore them altogether. So yay! Apple is now finally listening to us, and this is good and awesome for consumers and Apple and everyone. Right? Okay, enough history and current facts. It's time to mix it up and start asking questions. With this new obsession of market share, Apple has been listening to their customers more than ever. They know that even though they have one of the most loyal fan bases on the planet, there are some people that just don't care and could leave them whenever they feel like it. So in order to prevent these people from leaving, they have to find out what it is that's either bothering them or could keep their attention. At this point now, the iPhone has essentially been handled, considering how many people are switching to it lately. But there are so many other products out there that still could be improved, like the MacBook Pro. With the previous MacBook Pro, so many users and non-users have complained about there only being superior ports and the touch bar. Obviously, we know now that Apple has listened to that demographic, but this time, they screwed up because they listened. What? Yes, you may not completely see it, but when everyone said how happy they were that Apple brought back all of these things, they did it by taking a complete step back in the wrong direction. Something completely unlike Apple at all. This latest generation of the MacBook Pro may be an Apple product, but this time, it doesn't even feel like one at all. Apple is famous for being the company that begins the transition to newer standards. And never have they ever brought the inferior standard back just because people want it. When they kill the floppy disk, CD drive, Firewire, 30-pin, headphone jack, and USB-A. Have they ever brought any of these back? Of course not, because we have newer and better standards to replace these old ones. It confuses me to pieces as to why Apple went against their ways and brought back 3 different ports. HDMI is the dumbest that came back because honestly, USB-C Thunderbolt is a way better standard for displays than HDMI. MagSafe was cool, but we got rid of it because it's a proprietary standard and not universal. And the SD card slot. Camera people have been dying for this port to come back. But here's why the SD card doesn't matter. It's because not every camera uses SD cards. So why should SD be treated more special? This I/O is a complete step backwards. The removal of the touch bar is also a complete step backwards in the wrong direction. How so? I'm going to take you back to the original smartphones and explain why they suck. The original smartphones used to have a physical QWERTY keyboard on them, but there was a huge problem with this design. The phone was less adaptable to many different tasks, and the worst part about this design is that the keys are so unadaptable that most of the time you have keys and buttons that aren't being used. All of this is just because they are single, maybe dual purpose buttons. Function keys on our laptops are for the most part just as useless as those keyboards on older smartphones. Both of my Macs have function keys, and I hate how I have these dedicated buttons for features that I don't even use, wasting space for features that can be more useful. Out of the 12 function keys on my MacBook, I only regularly touch 5 of them. 5! That's less than 50%. The only keys that I actually use are the 2 brightness keys, F1 and F2, and my volume keys, F10 through F12. And these keys don't even offer me that dynamic of control. The other 7 on my keyboard are completely wasting space. Not to mention, the M1 function keys have replaced 3 functions for even more useless ones. The touch bar would have allowed for more controls than just 12, and it boggles my mind that people just do not care. Their reasoning for hating it so much is because when the OS freezes, well, so does the touch bar. Well, you want to know something, guys? When the OS freezes, so does the keyboard. I kid you not. My iMac has frozen before, and you want to know something? The keyboard don't respond. My MacBook has frozen before. The keyboard also didn't respond, and neither my iMac or my MacBook has a touch bar. What kind of excuse is this? And yes, this may have been you could have escaped the program if they put the escape key back on the keyboard as a physical key. Oh wait, didn't Apple do that with the 16-inch? Oh, yeah. They did. So, I don't understand why. That is the only reason why people hate the touch bar that I can think of. It's because it freezes. Well, guess what? If your computer freezes, not only does the touch bar freeze, so does the keyboard. What kind of excuse is this? Apple did not handle this touch bar problem properly. If I was in charge, I would have both options. Function keys for these weird people and the touch bar for those who know which offers more functionality. But no, instead they listened to this specific group of users and completely ignored the rest of us. As a result, we got a laptop with a few extra ports we don't need and the removal of something very functional. So why did this go so wrong? Believe it or not, it's because of listening. But let's be a bit more specific by asking and answering some questions. Is Apple actually listening to us? Yes. And no. The reality is, they're selective listening. They listened to the demographic of people who want function keys and worse ports on their laptop, but they still also ignore us at the same time with the iPad Pro. We keep telling Apple that it can't replace our computers. They think it's because of hardware. The truth is, and we all know it, it's because of software. We have been trying to tell Apple for so long that the iPad Pro can do basic everyday computer things with iPadOS as it is, but can barely do pro computer things because of iPadOS as it is. So they can't listen to us explain why the iPad Pro doesn't make sense for us, but they can listen to people whine and complain about removing newer and better standards. So is this selective listening that they're doing really a bad thing? With how Apple is selective listening right now, it may seem like it, but the truth is selective listening is very important. We all hate it when Apple completely ignores us no matter what, but they can't listen and please every single user in the process. So they do need to have a filter to filter in complaints to why the iPad Pro is practically unusable for most pros, and filter out complaints about switching to better standards. Listening to the right demographics isn't always easy. They need to make sure they listen to valid complaints so they can move forward and ignore whiny garbage complaints just so they don't fall behind. Unfortunately, this case seems to be a bad round of luck because the iPad Pro is only recommendable to artists, and my next laptop is going to have more useless crap that I would happily trade for something else. So I guess instead of this just being a general message to you, the viewer, this is also a message to Apple. As someone who loves Apple products and tech in general, I hope you listened to this and got something out of it. I want tech to improve just as much as the next person. Listening to the customer is a good thing, but make sure you're listening and addressing valid issues and not the petty complaints just because people want to be slow to adapt. Okay, thank you for watching. Do me a favor and interact with the stuff below. My name is DeWolf, Random Alpha, signing out.